Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Postman webinar series. I'm Paul Logan, and I will be your host today. We'll be walking through variables. So let's get started. Oh, actually, one second. Yeah, we have to just show you one thing real quick, which is the registration page. We're going to go ahead and share that in Slack, or not in Slack, in the chat. So, yep, if you look at the registration page, there's our upcoming schedule for the rest of the webinars, as well as a link to our YouTube page, which has a series of awesome videos on it that walk through a bunch of different, basically our previous webinars, as well as you can look at our personal page. And there are a bunch of other awesome playlists that are available that can teach you everything you need to know about Postman. So check that out. It's really good resources. And let us know if you have any questions or comments in the chat in Zoom. Other than that, let's get started. So today we're going to talk about variables. Variables in Postman are a way of assigning things dynamically to different values. So we'll show you in a little bit about how this can be practical and effective within an actual testing use case, or even in development. But it's important to just talk about the different levels of variables that exist in Postman right now. So there are, as we've talked about, collections and requests within Postman, and you'll see a collection here. We also covered parameters earlier on, which was our ability to assign URL parameters to a request before we sent it. Here we see some other categories, including globals, environments, and then local and data variables. So it's important to talk about these because they're extremely powerful tools that you can leverage while using Postman. Let's move down the stack and explain what each one is. Within your app on your desktop or laptop, your global variables are basically something that you can define within Postman that will be accessible to every single different collection and request, regardless of whether or not you have an environment selected or where you are. So global variables are sort of the sort of thing where, you know, your name is always your name, whereas the clothes you're wearing might change from day to day. So it's important to think about them as things that are constant. Collection variables are defined on a collection level. So these are things like clothing that will change from collection to collection. If you have a collection that needs a certain type of authentication for all of its, maybe say an access token for every single request you're going to be making, you might define that as a collection variable. So you could access it there. Let's talk about environments. So environments are portable scopes. Basically, what we've been talking about are scopes. You know, they're the range of access that you have to go and get different information. Environments are something that, and we'll show you in the app in just a second, are something that you can select. You have multiple environments, sort of like tools on a utility belt that you can move between. This is helpful if you're, say, a QA tester moving between different personas, or a developer checking different production or sandbox instances. This is a sort of thing where you can define, so there are sets of key value pairs where you can define pretty much anything. They're all stored as strings. And basically, when you select an environment, all of the variables in that environment, their names start applying to whatever requests you're using now. So say if I had a request that was using my, let's say, the day of the week, and I had an environment for Tuesday and an environment for Wednesday. If I was in the Tuesday environment, it would use Tuesday. If I was in the Wednesday environment, it would use Wednesday. So the other two things to talk about are local and data variables. Local variables exist within tests and prerequisites, and data exists within the body of requests that you're assigning. So those are local and data variables are oftentimes not used as much, and will be more covered when we get to the test and script section. I'll just show you when we do get into the app what they end up looking like. So let's talk about syntax real quick. There are 3 types of syntax that variables have. So with text inputs like bodies of requests, or sometimes in the actual endpoint of a request, you can use this double bracket or double curly brace is what we call it, to assign variables. So you just wrap whatever the name of your variable is in that double curly brace, and that will assign whatever that value is in your environment or your global to that specific variable. If you're in the path, you can use a different notation, which is a colon in front of the name, and that will function as well. And if you're in the environment, or sorry, if you're writing a script, you can use pm.environment.get and also pm.environment.set. Those are things that we'll cover later on in the next section, tests and scripts, next week. But if you're already working on tests and scripts and want to get ahead a little bit, that's one way to interact with environment variables. We're going to go ahead and pop into the app real quick. Oops, sorry. And show you what we mean by each different type of variable. So let's look here. When we look at all of our different, requests in this Zookeeper, that Zookeeper collection that we made last time, we see that, you know, here we're saying Lisbon, and we're hard coding it. And if we want to get animals from another, basically anything else, we'd have to go through all of these, each individual requests, and run them individually. And you know, that's really annoying to have to create a new request each time we want to just change this one value. So variables give you the power to actually go in and basically allow yourself to sub that out for whatever you want. So we're going to call this variable ZooLocation. Here, what we're seeing here is the environments dropdown. So the environments dropdown allows you to select from different environments within your workspace. Right now, we're going to create a new one, which you can do by clicking on this gear icon to the right. As you can see, it lists the environments here and allows you to share them to the rest of your to other workspaces if you'd like, duplicate them, download them as files, or delete or remove them. You can also import environments too if you've been given another one through a file. So let's go ahead and add a new environment that's our zookeeping environment. And we saw that we made ZooLocation a variable, and we're going to say, let's go to Moscow. What is in the Moscow Zoo? Okay, so we've done that, and if we look here, we see that so with any variable especially with any variable in the body, headers, and request, you can hover over it and it will show you what it is currently assigned to. As you can see right now, ZooLocation is currently assigned to nothing. So let's go ahead and go to zookeeping. And if you saw, that was slightly red before, and now it's turned orange. And you can see that the value is Moscow and the scope is the environment. So now what we've done is we have an environment variable that would allow us to switch. Say we only care about certain animals, like we want to check on the state of polar bears throughout a bunch of different zoos. We could create a polar bear. Basically, if we go up here to animal well-being, you see we have these. We could keep polar bear and replace this with a dynamic and then just switch environments in order to test it. So here is an example of one of the ways that we can use variables. If we pop into the headers, we'll see that you can actually also reference them in headers in body. it's not turning orange here, but it is in fact able to reference that. If we change this to post, and so it seems that those actually do not light up. I was under the impression they did, but these even if you do put them in the body or the headers, they will function. As we talked about earlier, you can use pm.environment.get and then the name of the variable to get the variable from your environment within the actual scripts. So here I could say get. And one thing that does happen here is as you get more and more variables, say I wanted to, in this environment, create another thing that was zoo size, and we're going to update that. Now if we start to type a different, we see that now that we have this drop down that automatically appears that allows us to select between them. So if you have an environment with a lot of different variables in it, this can be a good way to quickly select between them. Let's say that so as we spoke about earlier, let's say that we know that we're a polar bear health expert and we always only care about polar bears. But maybe sometimes, you know, there's someone who uses this or and for some reason, someone else might care about something else and that uses that has shared this collection with us that uses it differently. So we want to be able to share this with anyone and have them be able to see their specific animal that they've defined globally, regardless of their environment. So they always know, so we're going to say animal. They always know that they care about polar bears or penguins, not polar penguins. And we can, oops, sorry, it clicked out of that. So now that we've defined that globally, we can see that this is a global scope variable defined as polar bear. No matter what environment we switch into, this will always be defined as polar bear now. This is another feature that allows you basically to, if you're using things for a very specific function, using Postman for a very specific function, and you always need to have certain things set, globals are very helpful. Let's check out, so for example, let's say that, you know, I have a unique set of information that I need to authenticate to this zoo API. I can actually go and set variables on the collection level. And that will allow us to input things and actually reference them. So, on the collection level of variable. So as you can see, these are 3 different scopes. We talked about 2 other ones, which were local. Those pretty much only refer to tests and scripts, defining a variable through JavaScript. And then data, which refers to the ability to set these things as variables. So let's move forward and talk about, actually, before we do move forward, let's see if there's any questions. So I believe, so we had a question about which environment, what scope dominates when things are both global and, global and local in terms of animal. And I believe that the most immediate scope normally takes precedent, but let's go ahead and test that out just to be sure right now. So here you go. The closer you are in scope, the closest variable is the one that will be assigned. So if we were to change auth, globally, it would still remain as auth because it is a collection level variable. We've also had a request to review collection variables again. So collection variables, you can access them either when you create a collection via the variable page or via the edit panel, which brings up the same thing. The difference between an environment and a collection variable is sort of so I'll give you a quick example of this. So here our collection variable, as we discussed, is authorization, right? When we hit our API for this zoo database, we're always going to use this auth token. But sometimes I might care about, let's say now that we've changed animals, a different animal, or maybe even a different zoo. So now we have a call that has 3 different variables in it, and sometimes those things are going to change. I might need to work with all of those different things. So let's go ahead and say that I, as a animal well-being engineer, care about a lot of different animals and a lot of different zoos across the globe. And I need more than just one Moscow and I need to know more than just a Moscow and a giraffe, but I don't want to go through and retype those every time. So for environments, the power there, as opposed to collection variables, is that I can go ahead and create multiple of them and then edit them. Oops, sorry. So that now I'll have sorry, 1 second. So now we don't care about Moscow anymore. Let's talk about the lions in Lisbon. And we're going to say, and then let's also talk about, we will now have a, let's talk about the sharks. Oops, sorry. The sharks in Shenandoah. And I've just backed myself into a corner because I don't know how to spell Shenandoah. So now I, as a global zookeeping engineer, can automatically, or not automatically, but very quickly, check on the giraffes in Moscow. Oh, sorry, and let's go ahead and rename that too. It's good practice to keep environments accurately named, especially if you're using them for this purpose. So I can go ahead and check on the sharks in Shenandoah, and then hop over here and check on the lions in Lisbon, and then hop over here and check on the giraffes in Moscow. And that's all with a few clicks, as opposed to going in and rewriting all of those requests or creating a new request each time. Now I have a single request that I can operate off of. Let's say there is a different zookeeping database. In fact, I believe we have one. So this zookeeping database has an entirely different authorization type. It still has the same requests. I just need to do different things with it. So instead, I can hop in and this might be an environment variable, or it might be a collection variable. In this case, we might want to set it as a collection variable because we're dealing with an entirely different thing, but we don't want to have to copy this variable to every single environment that we're going to be using. And it's a pain to hard code it, and insecure to hard code it into everything else. So, and for example, maybe we also need a username here. In that case, in order to prevent magnification of a lot of different variables, that is a case in which we might use an environment or a collection variable over an environment variable. Are there any other questions, and does that seem to cover the difference between environment and collection variables? Okay, I'm not seeing any responses. So there is one thing I do want to cover really quickly, which is security, which just came up. And so when you sync data with the Postman cloud, everything is sent and encrypted. But the only piece of information on your computer that is encrypted at rest is an environment. Basically, if you're going to keep sensitive information, you would probably keep it in an environment. And this is where I should be given a slight slap on the wrist, because oftentimes you would not keep auth information unless it was not particularly useful or not particularly needed to be secure, which is irregular in a variable or in a collection variable because it's not encrypted. However, if you're pretty sure that no one's sneaking around and trying to steal your data, which is kind of hard to be sure about these days, then you could go ahead and throw it in there. But there are a lot of other cases where you will vary from collection to collection and still want to be changing environments in different ways, but having things stay constant within collections. In terms of sharing environments, so let's say if I do have a particularly secure piece of information that's in an environment, and I need to share this environment with someone else. And this is one of the things. So this is, I believe, allows us to share it to workspaces, and that goes out. But now anyone in that workspace will be able to see that environment, and they'll know that my password is alligator3. So instead, what is commonly the best practice is actually to go in, duplicate that, and go ahead and edit that. So now we have a copy, and we can keep everything that isn't sensitive in there, and instead leave this open so that the other person can put their password, which is probably alligator3 as well, into that environment when they go ahead and share it. So I would also share that one off. If there aren't any questions about the security surrounding environments, then we can go ahead and move on. Awesome. So I'm not hearing any other questions. So as we saw here, it's inconvenient to have all these different zoos, and it can be really helpful to be able to actually dynamically change these things. So there are a few other things to know about variables. There are built-in global variables that are things such as a GUID, a global unique ID, and a timestamp. So if we input these values as variables, they'll automatically be read. So in terms of, basically, in terms of this, you might have an API that always needs to know exactly when you're sending it information. You could go ahead and use that timestamp variable. The other thing, we talked about data variables earlier. So those might be a data file that you can use with Collection Runner, which will come up in another webinar that would allow you to basically move through something like a CSV while iterating over a collection and change that information. So that is something that's a little bit more complex that we won't be covering in this webinar series, but there is supporting documentation if you do a search on using data files with Collection Runner. So talking about environments, once again, security. It's important to frequently change your data. If you have frequently changing data, to use environments, keep sensitive data in there, and then any data that's movable or subjective. Postman also has random int. Someone commented. I'm not positive on that. We can go ahead and test it right now. Let's see. Oh, awesome. Thank you very much. Someone just confirmed it. Let's see what it, here we go. And so actually, if you, like we said with our autocomplete, if you do say these two things and then add a $, it will give you the list of different things that you can enter in. So random int will randomly select a number between 1 and 1,000, or 0 and 1,000 actually. Sorry about that. Okay. So just to wrap everything up about variables, they allow you to extend your collections, make them smaller, and give them a lot more power. You can use an environment to create an entire new level of changeability within the requests that you're making, especially if you're testing or developing, moving between different production environments, moving between different personas. Those are all really powerful uses of environments. They're of variables. Environments are good for storing sensitive data and are encrypted at rest. They're also good for switching around, as we were just talking about. And then in terms of appropriate syntax, there are the three we discussed for just in general. In the bodies and endpoints of requests, you can use that double bracket. In the path of requests, you can use that colon, although that is something that's being used less and less nowadays. I believe we're moving away from that. And within the body of a test or a pre-request, you can use that pm.environment.get. So next week, we'll be covering the tests and scripts. Yeah, here, let me. Sorry. Actually, I believe I had that up, but I'm not sure where it ran off to. But next week, we'll be covering tests and scripts on the webinar. You know, in between, please feel free to tweet at us or tweet at me with any questions you might have. The recording for this will be posted at some point online on the YouTube channel that we showed you and posted in the chat. And if there are no other closing questions, thank you guys very much for attending, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the next webinar.